Hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenidas, bienvenidos todos a una nueva sesión del ciclo de conferencias de lengua y cultura organizado por el Centro de Autoacceso y Mediateca de la Escuela Nacional de Estudios Superiores de la UNAM, Unidad Morelia. En esta ocasión nos hemos reunido para una sesión más de este ciclo en donde vamos a poder conocer y discutir una obra que nos invita a pensar sobre los viajes. The Great American Road Trip and Kerouac's on the Road es el título de nuestra conferencia de hoy, que está a cargo del doctor Jaime Chaboya Maquida. Y se dice que un viaje se vive tres veces, cuando lo soñamos, cuando lo vivimos y cuando lo recordamos. Entonces, hoy, en esta ocasión, nos vamos a poder internar, vamos a poder conocer más sobre este libro, vamos a poder reflexionar sobre nuestras propias experiencias, pero también aquellas cosas en donde los viajes nos dejan experiencias maravillosas. Entonces, le doy la más cordial bienvenida al doctor Jaime Chaboya, que es parte de la Academia de Inglés de nuestro Centro de Autoacceso, y pues lo dejo con todos ustedes. A las personas que van a ver este video, en la caja de información van a poder encontrar información de contacto por si quieren conocer más sobre las actividades del CAAM. Bienvenido, Jaime.
Muchas gracias, Professor Altamirano, and welcome everyone. My name is Jaime Chavoya, and I am very happy to present to you a novel that we're actually studying at the Mediateca at the NS Morelia. It's called On the Road, and it was written by Jack Kerouac. We're going to get a little bit into that, and we're going to try to understand how reading not so advanced literature, but start to read can help us improve our English and our vocabulary and the understanding of the cultures where English is growing as a language. So we're going to give a little bit of a presentation about this book, a little bit about what you can find inside there. We're going to have some questions at the end, and then we will just give you some more information. If you like this kind of material, if you want to learn more, how you can find more. Okay, so I'm going to start to share my screen. I guess you've probably noticed this conference will be in English, but don't worry, it will be okay. So don't be afraid, and let's dive in. So, why is it called The Great American Road Trip and Kerouac's On the Road? Well, first of all, I'm going to be using this version of the novel On the Road. It's a 1976 Penguin edition. So the numbers that you see referenced on your screen will be referenced to this version of the book. You can find this book in a lot of places. You can find them even for free at hostels and local bookstores or even garage sales. It's one of these kind of books that a lot of people have, and they tend to pass on to different hands over time. It's very often the story of one single on the road book will probably go through 3, 4, or 5 or 6 people before it finds a final home. And it has to do with something that's very cultural when we think about the English speaking world, especially the American English speaking world, and that is the road trip. It is something that is very common and very ingrained in the United States culture, and we're going to try to understand why. So, as we begin, this book was written by Jack Kerouac. He was a French Canadian American, a Catholic boy, and he was part of the Beat generation. So this does tie into the previous conferences that we were giving. Last time we spoke about Philippe Guston. He was a Beat painter, and from the 1950s also. He came to Morelia to paint a mural. We learned a little bit about him. And one of the last Beats that lived here in Michoacan, his name was John Ross, and we read some of his poetry. Before that, we spoke about Allen Ginsberg and his epic poem, Howl, which pretty much opened the doors and where the Beat generation saw its first public display of existence and appreciation in society. So there's some. So Jack Kerouac is one of the members of this boys' club that we call the Beat Generation, or the Beat Poets. That, remember, it includes people such as Neil Cassidy, William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, and of course Jack Kerouac. Now here's something really interesting. On the Road did not have this form when it was first written. It was actually written on one single long sheet of paper. Jack actually wrote this in a consecutive hour by hour marathon of just plain writing through stream of consciousness. The entire scroll that you can see right over here. I'm sorry, I'm just going to get my pencil. There. No. Where's my pencil? There's my pencil. This scroll over here is about 40 meters long, or about 80 something, or about 70 something feet long. It's a whole bunch of pieces of paper that are taped together, and he just put them into a manual typewriter and just kept on going. He did not have to think about changing the sheet of paper, so he could just focus on writing. And he was writing based on memory, on all of his experiences, just like the title says, on the road. You can actually see this scroll. It moves around to different museums. And so there, you probably have an opportunity to actually see the original scroll. So how does it begin? Well, this is how it begins. Dean and I were embarked on a journey through post-Whitman America to find that America and to find the inherent goodness in the American man. It was really a story about two Catholic buddies roaming the country in search of God. And we found him. That's how the book starts in its first pages. Now, we're going to start to try to tie different levels of understanding about what this book is about. Here we find our first clues. It's a journey that matches with the title, On the Road, right? So where does this journey take place? It's not in space. It's not in the air. It's not in the water. It's on land. It's on roads. Okay. And here in this picture, we have our two main characters. This picture is actually in real life are of the Beat Poets. We have Jack Kerouac, and we have his friend, Neil Cassidy. All of the characters that you will find in the novel of On the Road are based on real people. The two main characters are Sal Paradise, which is the name that Jack invents for himself in the novel, and Dean Moriarty, which is the name that he gives his friend Neil Cassidy. Now, we could go through all the list of characters, but I think that kind of gives you an idea about how the book is really a story based on memory, based on real things. It's not a historic book. So there is some fiction. There are some things that are made up, right? Like the names. But the memories, the things that Jack lived, are the inspiration for the stories here. And how do we know that? Well, if we keep on going here, Jack tells us, or his character tells us, then came spring, the great time of traveling. And everybody in the scattered gang was getting ready to take one trip or another. I go ready to travel west for the very first time. And this was really the way that my whole road experience began. And the things that were to come are too fantastic not to tell. So Sal Paradise is already telling us, like, hold on to your seats. There are going to be some fantastic stories coming up. Now, we're just going to take advantage and just look at this a little bit more, just to explain or illustrate how reading can help us with our English. So here we have a couple words that maybe some people are not familiar with. Scattered. Scattered. What does it mean? Well, it means when things are in a disorderly position or places. So if you think that, if you think of a unit and things that belong in that unit, they have a certain order. If you remove those things and put them in random spots and places, they have no order anymore. So they are scattered. And gang, of course, we have a word that sounds like that in Spanish. So it's a group of people, right? We usually call the gang, in the 1950s at least, a group of friends. It isn't until more recently that maybe the word gang is referred to more of the criminal side. But back then, it's your gang, your group of friends. Let's continue here. Excuse me. So, this is how they're going to start. Remember, Jack is represented as Sal Paradise in the book, and Neil Cassidy is represented as Dean Moriarty. And a little bit about Dean. In real life, Dean grew up pretty much on his own, on the streets, and he had a very deep love for cars. So much he would sometimes steal cars, and he just loved to drive them. So when you gave him a car and you put him behind the wheel, that means you put him in the driver's seat. He became a completely different man. Here's some proof of that in the novel. I could see that it was all going to be one big saga of the mist. Hoo-yee, yelled Dean. Here we go. And he hunched over the wheel and gunned her. He was back in his element. Everybody could see that. We were all delighted. We all realized we were leaving confusion and nonsense behind and performing our one and noble function of the time, move. Okay. So here we see how this really does try to portray the real life person of Neil Cassidy. This is something that you will find in the book with all of the characters. So, once again, let's try to use this for our English. So, here's one expression, hunched over the wheel. Now we know that we can imagine talking about a car and we talk about wheels, we're not going to be talking about the wheels of the car, but we're going to be talking about the driving wheel. The position that the driver takes over that wheel, in this case, is a hunched position. And the hunch refers to the back. It means the back curves. If you think about The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the novel by Victor Hugo, that's why he's called Hunchback, because there's a curve in his back. So here, Dean Moriarty is hunched over the wheel. And what did he do then? He gunned her. Her here is a very nice way, a very familiar, intimate way to refer to the car. So he gunned the car. But what does gunned mean? It's not taking out a gun. He actually just put a lot of impulse and energy and stimulus into the car. And how do you do that? You push on the gas pedal. So here we go, Dean said, and he hunched over the wheel and gunned her. He got into position and he started the vehicle as fast as it could go, right? Now here's another one, something that's very interesting that we can try to detect now about the novel. They were leaving something and going somewhere else. We were leaving confusion and nonsense. This is the position of where, this is the original position. This is where their starting point is. And how does the character refer to that starting point? Well, he says it's defined by confusion and nonsense. We always have a place that we begin to travel. In the case of Sal Paradise, and in the novel On the Road, his starting point is New York City. So that's kind of how he identifies that place. And now, where are they going? Well, he doesn't really say where they're going. That's one of the beautiful parts of the novel, is that it will take you to places that you just don't imagine, that you never plan ahead for. But there is one thing that is constant. To get to that next destination, no matter where you are going, you have to move. And this is not only in the physical sense, but it is movement of the spirit, movement of the mind, and movement of the feelings. Let's move on. Here is what some of the topics you will find if you want to read this book. And remember, we have a book club at the NS UNAM Morelia in our Mediateca. We're actually reading this book, and you can read along with us if you'd like to. Some of the topics that we will find here are the Great American Road Trip, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. We will also find topics relating to Americana culture and jazz music. There's a lot of jazz references inside the novel. But you might want to know, what is Americana? Americana is an aesthetic in the history of art and music and thinking in American culture. Americana is a nostalgia for the past. It is the memories, the collective memories that we have of the United States at the turn of the 19th century, around 1880, 1890, and all of the years before the First World War and up to the 1950s. That's kind of where Americana stops and a new America begins. Remember, what's so special about 1950 is that we will have the end of the World War II. We will have a great economic prosperity in the United States. And there will be a change of lifestyle. Cities start to become larger. People start to leave their homes in the country and they move to work in offices and companies. So Americana is a way of thinking about the past. If you want to know more about Americana, just let us know. Another topic that you will find is brotherhood. And of course, we saw that at the opening verses where we have Sal Paradise saying that this novel is about an adventure of two buddies, two friends. And of course, they will make more friends on their trips. And it becomes a brotherhood. And that's what in real life we had with the Beat poets. William Burroughs, Allen Ginsberg, Neil Cassidy, Jack Kerouac, all of these, Tim McClure, all of these people had this club and they identified and supported each other. They would write and read each other. Of course, we have references to sex, drugs, and more jazz. It's not sex, drugs, and rock and roll, not just yet. That will happen a little bit later. But during the 1950s, The beat culture was considered counterculture. That means it did not fit into the mainstream way of life in the United States. So they do take freedom to talk about things that were a little bit taboo, like sex and drugs. And of course, when you mix all of these things together, you're going to have adventure. These are the kind of things that you will find in this novel. Now I'm going to give you some more detailed version about what the novel is about. If we want to look at it in a very technical way, we have these topics like music and sex and traveling. But if in another way, we can look at the book as a series of trips. The book is divided into 5 parts, and each part has a geographic reference. Part 1, the trip starts in New York City. They go to Denver, then they go to San Francisco, and then they return to New York City. And that's the end of part 1. In part 2, for some reason, they just can't stop moving. They got a little excited about traveling, so they go on the road again. And this time they go south. They go from New York to New Orleans to San Francisco again, and then they return to New York. In part 3, they will go through the west, and they're going to go to Denver and then San Francisco. They're going to take a little while in Illinois and Detroit in the Midwest of the United States, and then again return to New York City. Part 4 is a little bit longer trip. It's the longest trip that is mentioned in the book. And that's where they go all the way to Washington, D.C., Cincinnati, St. Louis, Denver, and then they go to the border with Mexico. They cross the border at Laredo, and they reach Mexico City. And then after Mexico City, they return again to New York. And part 5 is just New York. We're going to take another moment of opportunity to talk about how reading this novel can help us with our understanding of American culture. We find descriptions of all of these places inside the novel. So our awareness of the geography of where are the cities distributed in the country, what is west, what is east, what is south, what is Midwest, what is Central America, or the middle of America, right? So we get all these things in our head too, that will make us more familiar with the country that we are that speaks this language, right? Well, the United States speaks 150 languages, I think, but English is one of the top ones. Here's a little geographical, visual way to understand the book in this technical term. So we have different road trips. They all start here in the Big Apple in New York City, and they usually all go to San Francisco at some point. And the longest trip that we mentioned gets all the way down here to Mexico City. In future presentations, we will talk a little bit more about what did the beats do down here in Mexico City. We already have a little of an idea from the past conference that you can look up on this YouTube channel about Philippe Guston and another writer, journalist. His name was John Ross. So let's keep on going. So now let's talk about the road trip. What is the road trip? Why is this so important? Well, when this book came out in 1956, 1957, the United States was starting its new highway system. Now you got to understand, these are thousands and thousands and thousands of miles that go all across the country. and make places connected and accessible in a way that they were not before. These are all freeways also. That means that you do not have to pay to go on these roads, to use these roads. And so this is something that's new. And when you add the economic prosperity of the 1950s, well, we have cheap gasoline prices, cheap vehicles that you can buy. And so people could travel more. Of course, not everybody had a job. Not everybody had the same kind of money. So different ways to travel were necessary, right? But where would they go to? Well, they would go everywhere. They would go on vacations. They would go camping to the forest. They would go see national monuments or national parks. How they got there was different depending on how much money you have. If you had a car, well, you would go by car. If you don't have a car, you could ask somebody to give you a ride that does have a car. When you don't know that person, we call that hitchhiking. Now, when we're talking in the year 2023, there are several places in the United States where hitchhiking is now illegal. But in the 1950s, hitchhiking was a very common practice. 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, it was still very common. If you had absolutely no money, you could also hop a train. Very dangerous. This is also a very illegal activity. And I do not recommend it. Don't think about it really. There's lots of people that have lost their life or have been severely amputated by not hopping onto a train. We see these stories now in a different context. Before, we have train hopping as a joyful, recreational way to travel, to move around, to make friends, and to live life. And very sadly, now, 50, 70 years later, we have the train hopping is something that people have to do in desperate situations, mainly to migrate. If you had a little bit of money, then you could just buy a ticket to go on the Greyhound bus. Now, how do we see this in the book? Well, okay, but before that, I just wanted to tell you, here's some ideas to get your imagination going. If you want to read this book and you want to think about maybe taking a road trip for yourself, well, where would you go? There are some routes that are very iconic. They're epic sometimes. And they're very beautiful. They're very touristy sometimes. A lot of people like to go and drive all the way up the Pacific coast, starting all the way in Tijuana, Los Angeles, going up north to San Francisco, then Big Sur, all those kind of places, going through Oregon and all the way up to Washington to the Arcadias. Of course, there's Route 66. You can find music and movies dedicated to Route 66. Or this other one, the Oregon Trail, is a very old trail. This is the trail this is the road or the trail that the first let's say pioneers used. These were pioneers is the name that we call the settlers, the first American United States citizen settlers or immigrants to the American continent, to North America, expanding the frontier. So remember, the United States was born with 13 colonies on the East Coast. And little by little, and sometimes a little bit faster, it grew and it moved the border a little bit further west and then a little bit further west. And then it got all the way to Texas. But it kept on going and going and going and going and going all the way to the other ocean. So it was from sea to shining sea. And that is the Oregon Trail. You can also take the Atlantic coast and you can visit all the main cities. From New Jersey all the way down to Florida. Here is a little graphic about the interstate system that I was mentioning earlier. And here we have people that are hitchhiking. They're sometimes if they don't fit in the front of the car, they don't care. They'll go in the back. So but the novel does not describe all of these things in a very romantic way. It does become very realistic. And it says sometimes it is not fun to travel. Sometimes it's very tiring. Like this part. This is where Sal Paradise is beginning his trip, but it doesn't go as what he was expecting or how he had planned. He had hitched a ride, and then the ride stopped and left him in the middle of nowhere. And it began to rain in torrents when I was let off there on Route 6 in New York. It was mountainous. Not only was there no traffic, but the rain came down in buckets, and I had no shelter. I had to run under some pines to take cover. This did no good. I began crying and swearing and socking myself on the head for being such a damn fool. I was 40 miles north of New York. I ran a quarter mile to an abandoned cute English-style filling station and stood under the dripping eaves. High up over my head, the great hairy Bear Mountain sent down thunderclaps that put the fear of God in me. All I could see were smoky trees and dismal wilderness rising to the skies. What the hell am I doing here? Poor Sal Paradise is stuck in the middle of nowhere, and there's no traffic. There's no other humans around to give him another ride. He had to run a great distance just to find shelter from the rain. And he was desperate. You can imagine, you're all by yourself. There's no one around to help you. You don't know where you're going. You might be hungry, and now you're all wet and cold. It's not a pretty picture, but that's just how it begins. Once he starts to move around, he finds that you don't have to walk everywhere. You can just hop a train. And here we have some pictures of people hopping trains. You can see one right here. And what you do is that you just you go into a train yard. A train yard is the place where trains are parked over the night or while they are resting or waiting their time to go somewhere. This is illegal. Remember, you don't want to be caught doing this, and it is very dangerous. But here we have in the book how he did it. He says, we rode the train a half mile into the piers, waving at switchmen and flagmen. They showed me the proper way to get off a moving car. The back foot first, and let the train go away from you and come around and place the other foot down. So we have some of those references in the book. We will also find wonderful descriptions of what America looked like back before corporate America existed. Remember, 1950s is when we start seeing huge nationwide companies come into existence, and they will change the landscape forever. We will start to have more buildings, higher buildings, larger cities, more cars, more traffic, more noise, lots of things. But in the 1950s, remember what Sal Paradise was. He was out to look for that America, the America that a lot of people think is gone, the America that was disappearing. He was looking for that. And here we have a description from San Francisco. It was Sunday. A great heat wave descended. It was a beautiful day. There was the Pacific, blue and vast, with a great wall of white advancing from the legendary potato patch, where Frisco fogs are born. Another hour and it would come streaming through the Golden Gate to shroud the romantic city in white, and a young man would hold his girl by the hand. I spun around till I was dizzy. I thought I'd fall down as in a dream, clear off the precipice. Oh, where is the girl I love? I thought, and looked everywhere, as I had looked everywhere in the little world below. And before me was the great raw bulge and bulk of my American continent. This will make this reading this kind of things will help us familiarize with a little bit of the geography. In this case, a little bit around San Francisco. The short way, the colloquial way to say San Francisco is to say Frisco. And something that's very iconic about the city is that it has a lot of fog, a lot of mist. It's vaporized water that's still dense enough that it will block your vision. Everything, it will be like walking in a cloud. Let's keep on moving. But at the end of the book, now I don't want to be a spoiler, but this is something that is important if you want to decide on reading this book. What happens when he compares nature and high mountains and mist and ocean and the road and nice people and bad people maybe, and the food that you can find on the road and the rain and the thunder from the skies. Back in New York City, Sal Paradise suddenly found himself on Times Square. I had traveled 8,000 miles around the American continent, and I was back on Times Square, and right in the middle of a rush hour, seeing with my innocent road eyes the absolute madness and fantastic horror of New York with its millions and millions hustling forever for a buck among themselves. The mad dream, grabbing, taking, giving, sighing, dying. Remember, at the beginning of the book, Sal Paradise says that they are leaving a place of confusion. And this is where he comes back to. Remember, he took 5 trips, and all of those 5 trips began in New York. They would go mainly, most of the time, to San Francisco, and then they would go back to New York. And this is what he would find. So you can imagine that when you get back to New York, you don't want to stay very long. You want to go on another trip. And we can take advantage of this part also to improve our English, right? So what's a rush hour? Well, a rush hour is common in English. It's a common expression. And we use that to describe maybe the 8 to 9 o'clock in the morning, and then around lunchtime, and then 5 to 6, 7 o'clock in the afternoon. That is when everybody is going and coming back from work, and the streets get filled, and people are tired, and people are angry in the traffic. And a buck, here's another good word. What is a buck? Well, a buck has 2 definitions. The proper biological definition of a buck is an adult deer, right? Like Bambi, if you know who Bambi is, when Bambi grows up, he will become a buck. The other meaning that we have for the word buck is $1. So you can go to the store and you can say, how much is this book? Someone will say, oh, that book is $2. That means $2. So that's where we're going to leave the description of this book. And I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. But before we finish, I just want to leave you with some questions that might help you decide if you want to read this book or learn more about the Beat Generation, the Beat poets, the kind of things that they would read, the music that they would listen to. So think about it. If you had the opportunity, where would you go to in the United States? Where would your road trip go? Would you go to the South, like New Orleans? Would you go to the West, like San Francisco? Would you go out east to New Jersey, maybe New York? Would you go to the Midwest, to places like Detroit, Chicago? Where would you go? Or would you go to the border with the United States and go to places like Laredo, Tijuana, places like that? How would you get there? Would you take a plane? Planes are very practical and they're fast. But that's what makes it different than a road trip. A road trip, you are spending more time either by yourself or with other people. You will have more opportunities to see and experience what is around you. Would you be looking for something? Would you have any expectations? And last of all, is your English ready for adventure? Do you think you could go from New York City and take the highway and get to San Francisco with your English? Hopefully you can say yes. But if you can't, or if you're wondering, if you have a little bit of a doubt that your English is not ready yet, then feel free to come over with us over at the Mediateca, and we will help you get the best English you can. So if you're interested in more things like this, check us out. We offer 13 languages, conferences, clubs, workshops. We give you personalized attention for learning your language. And we have all of these services online and in person, which is face-to-face. If you like more about learning about literature, then you can check some of my workshops out. I give a workshop on the introduction to beat literature, universal poetry. We also have a weekly news workshop, and then another one, which is narrative, creating stories, where we try to do a lot of imagination. And if you want to really learn more about it, then write us. Don't just think about it. Contact us today. Here's our email. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram and all these kind of other places. And you can also send us a WhatsApp message and we will get right back to you. And that is all for this conference today. I hope you enjoyed it. And now I'll just be waiting for Professor Altamirano, if he could just join us in to give closure to this conference. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody. Professor Altamirano should be connecting just shortly, I'm sure. Professor Lalo. Should be around there. Okay. Well, he says he's going to catch up in just a second. So I'm just going to remind you a little bit more about how to contact us. Our WhatsApp number is 443-614-4254. And we have a second number at 443-100-4780. Give us a call or give us a WhatsApp message and we'll be right back with you. Thank you very much. See ya.
Muchísimas gracias, doctor Jaime, por esta charla tan increíble y por esta invitación también, ¿no? Para conocer un poco más sobre estos clásicos del siglo XX, en donde pues nos hacen pensar, ¿no? Que estos viajes en esta edad también son momentos imprescindibles, la sed de cambio, la sed de transformación y poder encontrarnos, ¿no? Al final de cuentas, no solamente uno descubre estos pasajes increíbles, estas personas, reforzamos amistades, sino también nos conocemos a nosotros mismos. Entonces, en esta novela autobiográfica de este autor, en donde nosotros vamos a poder conocer cómo él vivió esta experiencia con sus amigos, y estos detalles tan mágicos de cómo él llevaba sus libretitas para hacer sus notas, que él escribió en 3 semanas, que ha sido una novela muy importante para todos. Bueno, pues, ¿qué nos queda a nosotros, no? Como dijo usted al final, ¿qué nos queda por conocer? Y ojalá que aceptemos también nosotros realizar estos viajes. Entonces, pues en este viaje que nos queda, hoy tuvimos una parada y pues nos vemos en la próxima sesión. Tal vez seguiremos aprendiendo más en este ciclo de conferencias y pues nos da mucho gusto que nos acompañen. Entonces, toda la información queda aquí abajo y la información también de WhatsApp que nos compartió el doctor Jaime Chávez. Entonces, nos dará mucho gusto encontrarnos y nos vemos en la próxima sesión del ciclo de conferencias de Lengua y Cultura. A nombre de la maestra Karina Godínez Sepúlveda, les damos un agradecimiento por habernos acompañado y pues estamos y por aquí los esperamos. No se olviden de revisar también los videos que tenemos en Shorts y las otras conferencias a las que nos invitó también el doctor Jaime.